He's looking for diamonds in the rough. With Lee Cowan, meet American picker Mike Wolfe.
Something had always been off about Mike Wolfe from American Pickers. Now, with his marriage dissolved, his longtime co-star gone, and his show stumbling toward an uncertain end, the carefully guarded secrets of his private life have finally begun to surface. Why did Mike never defend himself against the betrayal accusations from Frank Fritz? Did he really cheat on his wife with Leticia Cline? Join us as we uncover the real story of the double life Mike Wolfe lived while America was watching, taking a chance on rust hagglers. Before any of the bad or even good stuff happened, Mike Wolfe spent 5 years trying to get someone, anyone, to put his show on TV. He pitched the idea everywhere. 2 guys in a van driving around the country buying old junk from people's barns. And the networks kept telling him no. One executive actually asked, "Who wants to watch people haggle over rust?" You can laugh at that now because that executive doesn't work there anymore, and Mike Wolfe is a millionaire. But here's the thing. Back in 2009, that wasn't a crazy question. Reality TV back then was all about drama. Housewives screaming at each other, pawn shops staging fights, shows built on backstabbing and blow-ups. Nobody thought a quiet show about 2 friends and some dusty motorcycles would work. The History Channel took a chance anyway, and on January 18, 2010, American Pickers premiered with 3.1 million viewers. That was the biggest debut for the network since Ice Road Truckers 3 years earlier. By the end of the first season, 5.4 million people were watching every episode. A show about rusty junk was beating American Idol's numbers. So what made it work? Simple. Mike Wolfe wasn't acting. A typical day on set had the crew follow Mike into barns that had been locked for years. Somehow, under a dirty tarp, he could find a motorcycle from the 1930s. And whenever he did, the way his face would light up couldn't be faked for 1 episode, and definitely not for 27 seasons. Meanwhile, over on Storage Wars, guys were yelling, "Yoop!" and bidding up prices just to make good TV. That show was fun, sure, but it was theater. American Pickers was different. Mike would pull a rusted sign out of a haystack and tell you why it mattered, where it came from, and who made it. It felt like a lesson in American history, not a game show. The rest of the cast made it work too. Danielle Colby ran the shop back in LeClaire, Iowa, and she wasn't playing a role. That was really her job. She kept things running while Mike and Frank were on the road, and the way the 3 of them talked to each other felt like real friends, because they were real friends. Mike and Frank had been picking together since they were kids, and Danielle had been in their world for years, long before any cameras showed up. For more than a decade, nobody asked what was going on behind the scenes. The show on TV was just too good to question. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried forever, and Mike had plenty of them, starting from before he ever came on screen. Who exactly was Mike Wolfe before the fame? Boy meets Wolfe. Born on June 11, 1964, as the second of 3 to a single mother in Joliet, Illinois, Mike knew pretty early on that he had to make himself useful in order to survive. That's why at 4 years old, he was already digging through trash, hoping to find treasure. And the first time he found it, it was a treasure worth $5. It was a bicycle in the bushes near his neighbor's home. Mike put air in the tires, wiped it down, and rode it until an older kid offered him $5 for it. He didn't need to be told twice. He took the deal, and he might not have known it then, but that was the entire logic of his adult career. Mike's family later moved to Bettendorf, Iowa, and he ended up growing up in the Quad Cities region, where in the 8th grade, he met a boy named Frank Fritz. Their friendship grew as they realized they both liked digging through other people's discarded things. Frank, who was a year older than Mike, was a lifelong collector who started hunting for treasures like beer cans, rocks, stamps, and coins as a kid. Growing up in the Quad Cities helped him develop a very sharp eye for antiques at local flea markets and yard sales. The duo would walk to school together through the alleys rather than the streets, because the alleys were where the garages were open, and they could see people tinkering on junk. Then, some days later, that same junk would magically end up at the curb with a free sign on it. They never stopped walking that way, and they never stopped asking how. Mike would later say that Frank had a better eye for certain things, and Frank would later say that Mike had the nerve to ask for a lower price, and that unspoken respect for each other's different strengths was the glue that held them together for 40 years before a single camera ever rolled. Mike, for his part, became a competitive cyclist in his 20s, racing at Cat 4 and Cat 3 levels from 1989 through 1998. And after that arc, he opened 2 bicycle stores in Iowa, the Village Bike Shop in East Davenport, and a second store in Eldridge, which he financed by selling a 1934 Harley-Davidson motorcycle to a collector in Bangkok, Thailand. When the bike shops eventually closed, he hit the road for nearly 2 decades, driving the back roads of America in a cargo van and logging more than 60,000 miles in search of what he called rusty gold. Building the network of contacts and encyclopedic market knowledge that would become the backbone of the History Channel's most successful show. Then, in 2000, he opened Antique Archaeology in LeClaire, Iowa, turning a personal empire of accumulated junk into a legitimate retail business that attracted collectors and enthusiasts from across the country. And through all of those years, Frank Fritz was either in the passenger seat or a phone call away, because that's just what 40 years of friendship looks like when nobody's watching. That was the man America thought it knew. But a deep betrayal was brewing, one that would destroy their friendship and turn the public permanently against Mike. So, what really happened between Mike and Frank Fritz? A lifetime of regret. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz weren't just friends, they were brothers. When American Pickers finally made them famous, their chemistry couldn't be faked. It was the texture of 4 decades of familiar disagreement, of friendly irritation when one spotted what the other had walked past, of arguments over price that sounded like 2 brothers who had been bickering since 8th grade and would keep bickering until they were old men. But somewhere along the way, something broke. And the way it broke is the kind of thing that keeps a person awake at night, wondering if they could have done something different. Frank started to feel, deep in his bones, that the camera loved Mike more, that the edits favored him, that he was becoming the sidekick in a story that had once belonged equally to both of them. But he didn't say this quietly to Mike over a beer one night. Instead, he let it fester, and when he finally spoke, he spoke to reporters. In July 2021, after his departure from the show was announced, Frank told the press that American Pickers had been biased towards Mike by 1,000%, and that they hadn't spoken in 2 years. He even said that Mike was replacing him with his own younger brother, Robbie. The words landed like a punch. Fans immediately took sides, and social media turned into a battlefield. Here is what Frank needed, though he never said it out loud. He needed Mike to call him, to show up at his door, to fight for the friendship the way they used to fight over a rusty sign. Instead, Mike posted a careful, warm Instagram message about missing Frank and wishing him well. And Frank looked at that message and saw not his best friend, but a public relations statement, something scripted and insincere. He dismissed it with a bitterness that surprised even himself. They never spoke again after that. 40 years of friendship. And it ended with a social media post. Then came the pandemic, and Frank injured his back, and he had surgery, and he took the opioids they gave him, and the isolation of lockdown pressed down on him like a weight. His romantic relationships collapsed. His career was gone. And the one person who had known him since he was a boy, the one person who could have pulled him out of the spiral, was not speaking to him. Frank fell into addiction, not because he was weak, but because he was alone. And when production resumed, and the networks required negative drug tests as a condition of filming, he could not provide one. They boycotted him, and he lost pieces of himself that he never got back. By the time Mike got to him, Frank was already on the verge of passing away. He closed Frank's eyes himself, and in that moment, all the misunderstandings and all the silence and all the public accusations collapsed into an unbearable truth. They had wasted the last years of their friendship on pride and hurt feelings, and now there was no time left to fix it. But in another relationship that everyone thought was successful, something terrible was going on. Whose fault was it? And when did Mike start living a double life? Mike's missing piece. No one really knows how Mike met the love of his life, but there's no American Pickers fan who didn't hear about their exceptional wedding ceremony. On September 8, 2012, Mike Wolfe married Jody Faith in a ceremony in Leiper's Fork, Tennessee, themed around the 2000 Coen brothers film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? A detail that said everything about how strong and unique the union they both shared was. For the next 8 years, Jody managed his social media accounts and many of his business operations, especially throughout the height of American Pickers, when Mike was so busy with media satisfaction, PR, shoots, and resting that he couldn't handle everything himself. And together, they had one child, a daughter named Charlie Faith Wolfe, born the same year they married, whom Mike has since kept away from the media and spotlight, only occasionally sharing updates about her on his personal Facebook and Instagram page. But then, suddenly, fans began to notice Mike living apart from Jody. And not long after that, he appeared publicly with a new woman named Leticia Cline, a former model and motorcycle enthusiast who shared his exact combination of interests in vintage vehicles, open roads, and that particular American aesthetic he had been documenting his entire career. People were furious, and the tabloid headlines were not in support of Mike's actions at all, running stories about betrayal and infidelity, and asking how the wholesome picker from Iowa could so quickly replace the mother of his child with a younger woman. And Mike, as usual, said nothing to defend himself. But this is the real truth. Mike's marriage to Jody had already collapsed. In June 2020, Jody secretly filed for divorce because of various reasons of irreconcilable differences, and the settlement was finalized in 2021, requiring Mike to pay approximately $634,000 in alimony, while Jody received full ownership of their Nashville home and another property in North Carolina, along with a share of American Pickers royalties through 2026. The legal ties had already been cut before Leticia ever entered the picture, and Mike had simply chosen to move on quietly rather than announce his divorce to the world. What Leticia brought him was a kind of peace he had been missing. She shared the same love for vintage vehicles and open highways, and her presence felt less like a rebound and more like a comfortable bed to lie on after years of sleeping on the floor. When asked about marriage, both of them gave the same answer. They were enjoying their lives and not in a hurry to define anything more than that. Leticia lifted him from the depression of losing his family and his fortune. And while the public continued to whisper about a double life that never actually existed, Mike lived his peaceful truth. But just when he thought things couldn't get worse, Mike almost lost everything in a second, including his new love. What happened on that September night? a second chance. What happened on the night of September 12th, 2025 in Columbia, Tennessee, was not something Mike Wolfe and Leticia Cline had prepared for. They were driving a vintage Porsche 356 when a 76-year-old man named Lerone Heads pulled out abruptly from a side street in an SUV and rammed into them. Leticia later described it as a situation that gave them little to no time to react. But just before the major impact, Mike broke the steering wheel with his body and prevented himself from being impaled by the steering column, an instinct that likely saved his life. Mike escaped with minor scrapes, a broken nose, stitches, heavy bruising across his face, and injuries to his knee and wrist. He was even released from the hospital the following day. But Leticia took the brunt of it: broken jaw, broken ribs, fractured sternum, and a partially collapsed lung. She underwent multiple surgeries and spent weeks in the hospital before beginning a long recovery. The following morning, Mike posted on his Instagram story, "By the grace of God, we're both safe and okay." Then he posted a photograph of the wreckage alongside the words, "It's been a rough night, but now there's light at the end of the tunnel." Lerone Heads, the drunk driver, was charged with DUI, vehicular assault, and failure to yield resulting in serious bodily injury. 4 months later, Leticia returned to TikTok to announce she was preparing to give her victim impact statement, saying, even though she was still limited with speech, she had a lot to say. But just weeks after that crash, another blow landed, this time from within his own cast. And it signaled the beginning of the end for everything he'd built. The beginning of the end. In December 2025, Danielle Colby posted a video on her 50th birthday announcing that American Pickers was done. She described it as a financial crossroads, said she had found out the show was finished, and thanked fans for 15 years of watching. Following this abrupt announcement, headlines ran across every entertainment outlet. The reason Danielle believed the show was finished wasn't just a hunch. It was rooted in numbers that had been trending downward for years. By late 2025, American Pickers had lost nearly half its peak viewership from Season 1, when 5.4 million fans tuned in each week. Advertising revenue had followed suit, and the History Channel had quietly reduced the show's production budget twice in 3 years. Danielle, who had watched the ledgers from her position as a longtime cast member, saw the writing on the wall. The network was spending less on location shoots, cutting back on travel days, and leaning harder on cheaper, stationary episodes filmed around the LeClaire shop. When she announced the show was done, she wasn't spreading rumors. She was stating what the financials had been screaming for months. Mike, who was in the middle of voiceover work for his new History Channel series, responded within days, trying to debunk the claim. He and the History Channel confirmed that there was no truth to the cancellation rumors and that production would resume after Mike completed his new project. Danielle later clarified that her perspective had been primarily financial, and that Mike later called her to assure her that things were still happening. But this just served as subtle foreshadowing to the show's coming decline. That new project, History's Greatest Picks with Mike Wolfe, premiered on February 22, 2026, as part of the network's History Honors 250 campaign. Unlike the open-road chaos of American Pickers, this 8-episode series puts Mike in a studio setting, walking viewers through the stories behind legendary artifacts, a safer, cheaper format that could secure his long-term future even if the original show fades away completely. So far, early reviews have been few but positive, and if the show finds its audience, Mike may have successfully pivoted from reality star to history host before the wreckage of American Pickers even settles. In the most current season of this new show Mike was working on, An episode was dedicated to Frank Fritz, and in there, Mike had to openly confirm the death of his friend for the first time in public. He revealed that what hurt him the most in this situation was how they never got to reconcile properly before his death, and how it was all just one whole big misunderstanding. Now, as of April 2026, Mike Wolfe is 61 years old, living in Tennessee, co-parenting a teenage daughter with his girlfriend Leticia, recovering from a car accident, hosting a new television show, keeping the antique archaeology store in LeClaire open after closing Nashville, and trying to be less secretive. He appeared in the Western film Day of Reckoning alongside Leticia Cline, which premiered in Los Angeles in March 2025, marking his first significant acting credit outside the reality television world he built. After all that, he still maintained his endorsement relationship with Indian Motorcycles. He also operates Two Lanes Guest House in Columbia, Tennessee, where guests stay in a property furnished with pics from the show. Why did you think Mike Wolfe was really particular about secrecy all these years? And do you think Frank was right to feel that way about his screen time? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.